December 1944 marked a moment of dangerous confidence for the Allies in Western Europe. After the liberation of France and the steady advance toward Germany, many believed the end of World War II in Europe was only weeks away. German forces appeared exhausted, retreating on multiple fronts, and Allied momentum seemed unstoppable. But beneath that optimism lay a fatal assumption that the enemy no longer had the strength or the will to strike back. Deep in the frozen forests of Belgium and Luxembourg, Adolf Hitler was preparing his final gamble. What would soon be called the Battle of the Bulge was designed to do what years of conventional defense had failed to achieve: fracture the Allied front, seize the port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace in the West. The plan relied on speed, surprise, and the belief that Allied command structures would respond slowly to chaos. In the early hours of December 16, 1944, that gamble began. More than 250,000 German soldiers, supported by hundreds of tanks and artillery pieces, smashed into American positions across an 85-mile front in the Ardennes. Fog, snow, and poor visibility grounded Allied air power, while inexperienced U.S. divisions absorbed the full weight of the assault. Within hours, communications broke down, entire units were cut off, and the illusion of control vanished. At the center of this unfolding crisis was a small Belgian town whose name would soon echo through military history: Bastogne. The town was not valuable for its size or industry, but for its roads. 7 major highways converged there, making it the logistical heart of the region. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled movement across the Ardennes. Recognizing this, the Allies rushed the 101st Airborne Division into the town, where it soon found itself completely surrounded. The siege of Bastogne had begun. Inside SHAEF headquarters, the situation appeared grim. Reports were fragmentary, intelligence estimates were being revised upward by the hour, and reserves were limited. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower faced a dilemma that would define the Allied response to the Ardennes offensive: how to react fast enough without losing cohesion. The Allied command was under its greatest strain since D-Day. South of the crisis zone, in eastern France, one commander viewed the situation differently. George S. Patton, commanding the Third Army, was preparing his own offensive toward the Saar region. Unlike many of his peers, Patton had long suspected that the Germans would attempt a major counteroffensive. His intelligence officers had noticed unusual radio traffic and troop movements weeks earlier. To Patton, the signs were unmistakable. This was not a local counterattack, it was a strategic strike. What separated Patton from other senior commanders was not recklessness, but anticipation. He understood that wars are often decided not by perfect plans, but by who moves first once reality breaks those plans apart. While others focused on restoring order, Patton focused on time. Every hour Bastogne remained surrounded meant more casualties, fewer supplies, and a shrinking chance of relief. This is where the legend often becomes distorted. Patton did not simply ignore orders or reject authority. Instead, he did something far more controversial in a rigid military system. He prepared to act before being told exactly how. His obsession with WW2 logistics, fuel, vehicles, road capacity, weather, allowed him to visualize a solution others considered impossible. Turning an entire field army 90 degrees in winter was not bravado, it was a calculation. The Third Army was massive: hundreds of thousands of men, tens of thousands of vehicles, artillery, supply depots, and communication networks. Moving such a force normally required weeks of preparation. Patton believed he could do it in days, not because he ignored reality, but because he understood it intimately. This belief placed him at the center of one of the most enduring debates in military history: military initiative versus command discipline. As the Battle of the Bulge deepened and Bastogne's defenders rationed ammunition and medical supplies, the question was no longer theoretical. Should a commander wait for complete authorization when the situation was already collapsing, or should he prepare for decisive action before permission arrived? In December 1944, those questions were not discussed in classrooms or memoirs. They were measured in lives. And as the snow continued to fall over the Ardennes, George S. Patton was already preparing to test the limits of speed, authority, and leadership in World War II, setting the stage for one of the most studied maneuvers in modern military history. To understand why the Battle of the Bulge nearly succeeded, it is not enough to describe German strength. The real story lies in how deeply the Allies misunderstood the nature of the threat they were facing. By late 1944, Allied intelligence assessments were shaped as much by optimism as by evidence. German forces were retreating on every front. Fuel shortages were crippling the Wehrmacht. Allied air power dominated the skies whenever weather allowed. To many planners within the Allied command, Germany no longer possessed the capacity for a large-scale offensive. This assumption proved dangerously wrong. Hitler's plan for the Ardennes Offensive was audacious, reckless, and rooted in desperation, but it was not irrational. He correctly identified several Allied weaknesses: extended supply lines, overconfidence, exhausted frontline divisions, and a belief that the Ardennes were unsuitable for major armored operations. This belief had existed since 1940, when the Germans themselves had exploited it against France. In 1944, the Allies made the same mistake. German planners concentrated their forces in secrecy, using forest cover, radio silence, and night movements to conceal preparations. Entire divisions were shifted without triggering alarm. When intelligence officers did notice anomalies, such as increased rail traffic or missing units, those warnings were often dismissed as defensive repositioning. In the months leading up to December, Allied intelligence repeatedly underestimated German strength in the West by tens of thousands of men. When the offensive began on December 16th, the scale of the attack shocked everyone. The German 5th Panzer Army and 6th Panzer Army punched through thinly held American sectors, many defended by green units or exhausted formations pulled back to quiet areas for rest. The terrain favored the attackers. Narrow roads, dense forests, and poor visibility neutralized Allied advantages in mobility and air power. Within the first 48 hours of the Battle of the Bulge, entire American regiments were surrounded or destroyed. The 106th Infantry Division suffered catastrophic losses. Saint-Vith fell. German armored columns surged westward, exploiting confusion and collapsing command links. What had been envisioned as a limited German thrust quickly became the largest land battle the United States would ever fight in World War II. At SHAEF headquarters, the crisis exposed a fundamental problem within Allied planning. The command structure was efficient in deliberate, methodical offensives, but far less suited to sudden, chaotic reversals. Reports arriving from the front were contradictory. Some units reported heavy resistance, others had gone silent entirely. Eisenhower and his staff were forced to rebuild the operational picture almost from scratch. The most alarming development was the rapid German advance towards Bastogne. The town was never meant to become a symbol. It became one because of circumstance. German planners understood that controlling Bastogne would paralyze Allied movement across the Ardennes. Roads that Allied forces relied upon for reinforcements and counterattacks all converged there.
Losing Bastogne would not simply mean losing ground, it would mean losing time, flexibility, and the initiative. As German units closed in, the Allies rushed the 101st Airborne Division into Bastogne with little preparation. The division arrived without sufficient winter clothing, limited artillery support, and minimal supplies. Within days, they were surrounded. The siege of Bastogne became a microcosm of the larger battle: isolation, confusion, and brutal pressure. This was the moment when the Allied command faced its greatest test since Normandy. Traditional responses, careful planning, staged redeployment, deliberate buildup, were no longer viable. German armor was advancing faster than staff officers could process paperwork. The enemy was not waiting for consensus. Yet many senior commanders still viewed the situation through a bureaucratic lens. Requests for reserves moved slowly through channels. Timelines were measured in weeks, not days. In theory, this ensured coordination. In practice, it risked paralysis. It was against this backdrop that George C. Patton stood apart. While others struggled to interpret incomplete intelligence, Patton focused on intent. He did not need perfect information to see the pattern. The Germans were overextending themselves, betting everything on speed. If they could be hit hard and early on the flanks, the offensive would collapse. Patton's experience taught him that operational tempo mattered more than elegance. His understanding of World War II logistics, how fuel moved, how roads bottlenecked, how long units could fight without resupply, allowed him to think in terms of hours rather than days. He knew that if the Third Army could strike quickly, it could unbalance the entire German plan. Crucially, Patton also understood something many overlooked: the psychological dimension of warfare. German commanders expected confusion and delay. They expected the Allies to react methodically. What they did not expect was an immediate, aggressive counterstroke from the south. As the Ardennes campaign unfolded, the gap between expectation and reality widened. German columns advanced, but at the cost of fuel, cohesion, and time. Every mile west made them more vulnerable if someone had the courage to strike back fast enough. By December 17th, the battle had reached a critical phase. Bastogne was encircled. American units were retreating under pressure. Allied reserves were thin. The outcome of the Battle of the Bulge was still uncertain, and in the midst of that uncertainty, one commander was already preparing a response that would challenge not only German expectations, but the very norms of Allied command in World War II.
While the Battle of the Bulge raged in the Ardennes, most Allied commanders were reacting to events already unfolding. George S. Patton, however, was operating on a different timeline. Long before Bastogne became a symbol of resistance, Patton had trained himself to think in terms of probability rather than certainty. He believed that waiting for perfect information in World War II was not caution, it was delay. From his headquarters in eastern France, Patton commanded the Third Army, a massive formation positioned for an offensive into the Saar region. On paper, his mission had nothing to do with the Ardennes. His units were oriented east, supply lines calibrated for a push into Germany, and artillery registered for a different battlefield entirely. Redirecting that force north would require dismantling weeks of planning. Yet Patton saw what others hesitated to admit. The German offensive was not a sideshow, it was the decisive moment of the winter campaign. Intercepted radio traffic, prisoner interrogations, and the sheer scale of the attack told him everything he needed to know. The Germans were gambling everything on speed. That meant they could be beaten by speed. Patton's genius did not lie in ignoring authority, but in understanding how authority functioned under pressure. He knew that Allied command procedures were designed to prevent chaos, not to respond to it. In crises, the system moved slowly because it was meant to.
Patton's solution was not to break the system, but to outrun it. On December 16th, as reports from the Ardennes worsened, Patton began issuing what he carefully labeled planning directives. These were not combat orders. No divisions were told to attack, no formations were officially redeployed. Instead, Patton instructed his corps commanders to quietly prepare for the possibility of a sudden movement north. Routes were reconnoitered, fuel allocations were reviewed, supply dumps were discreetly repositioned, bridges were evaluated for load capacity. This distinction mattered. In military terms, planning without authorization is permissible. Moving combat forces without orders is not. Patton operated precisely in that gray zone. His understanding of World War II logistics allowed him to prepare without openly violating the chain of command. By the time higher headquarters fully grasped the scale of the crisis, Patton would already be ready. To many staff officers, this behavior was unsettling. Armies, after all, are not designed to pivot on intuition. They function on orders, approvals, and synchronization. Turning an entire army 90 degrees in winter was not just difficult, it was unprecedented. Moving fuel, ammunition, artillery, communications, and tens of thousands of vehicles required coordination on a scale rarely attempted under combat conditions. But Patton had rehearsed this mentally for years. He believed that commanders should never ask if something was allowed before asking if it was necessary. In his mind, Bastogne represented necessity. The siege of Bastogne was not just a tactical problem, it was a strategic test. If the 101st Airborne collapsed, the Germans would gain momentum they could not be allowed to keep. Critically, Patton also understood Eisenhower. Eisenhower valued initiative, but only when it was paired with accountability. Patton gambled that if he could present Eisenhower with a solution already prepared, rather than a request still in planning, the answer would be yes. He was betting not just on his own judgment, but on his commanders. This was the heart of the dilemma that defines Patton's legacy. Was he acting without authorization, or was he ensuring that authorization, when it came, would actually matter? The difference between those two interpretations would shape how his actions were judged then and remembered later. Meanwhile, conditions at Bastogne continued to deteriorate. The 101st Airborne Division was rationing ammunition, medical supplies were running low, weather grounded air resupply. German artillery pounded the perimeter relentlessly. Time was the enemy, and Patton knew it. Every hour spent waiting for formal approval was an hour the Germans could consolidate their gains. Patton believed that the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge would be decided not by who had better plans, but by who acted first once those plans collapsed. In that sense, the battle was already shifting from a test of strength to a test of leadership. As December 17th turned into December 18th, Patton finalized his preparations. Corps commanders were alerted, routes north were assigned, timetables were drafted down to the hour. When the call finally came from Eisenhower to attend the meeting at Verdun, Patton was ready, not with excuses, but with an answer. He would soon claim he could attack in 72 hours. To most in the room, that would sound like arrogance. In reality, it was a statement of fact. The planning had already been done. The stage was set for a confrontation not just between armies, but between two philosophies of war: deliberate control versus decisive initiative. And at Verdun, in a room heavy with history, George P. Patton was about to force the Allied command to choose.
On the morning of December 18, 1944, senior Allied commanders gathered in Verdun, a location chosen deliberately by Dwight D. Eisenhower. Verdun was more than a meeting place. It was a symbol, one of the bloodiest battlefields of the First World War, a reminder of what hesitation and attrition could cost when war spiraled out of control. Now, as the Battle of the Bulge intensified, Eisenhower wanted every man in that room to understand the stakes.
The atmosphere was tense. Reports from the Ardennes continued to worsen. German forces had seized key towns, American units were fragmented, and Bastogne remained surrounded. The Allied command faced a rapidly narrowing window of opportunity. Every plan presented that morning carried timelines measured in days or weeks, time the defenders of Bastogne did not have. When George S. Patton entered the room, his demeanor stood in sharp contrast to the exhaustion around him. He appeared calm, even confident. To some, it seemed inappropriate. To Patton, it was clarity. While others were still reacting, he had already committed mentally to a course of action. Eisenhower laid out the situation bluntly. The Germans had achieved surprise. The front was bent, but not yet broken. The immediate priority was relieving the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne. Eisenhower asked a simple question: how quickly could Allied forces strike back? One by one, commanders offered cautious estimates. 10 days, 2 weeks. Conditions were unfavorable. Roads were icy. Units needed time to disengage and reorganize. These were reasonable assessments by conventional World War II planning. Then Patton spoke. "I can attack in 72 hours." The room fell silent. Eisenhower stared at him, certain he had misheard. Patton repeated himself. He outlined his proposal with precision. 3 divisions from the Third Army would pivot north, disengage from their current axis, move over 100 miles in winter conditions, and strike the German southern flank, reaching Bastogne by December 22nd. To most officers present, the proposal bordered on the impossible. The logistical challenge alone defied precedent. Moving such a force under combat conditions required extraordinary coordination. Fuel, ammunition, artillery, communications, all would have to be recalculated and redirected in real time. This was World War II logistics at its absolute limit. Eisenhower objected. The distances were too great, the weather too severe, the risk of chaos too high. Patton listened patiently, then delivered the sentence that would define the meeting. The logistics are already in motion. That statement changed everything. Patton explained that since December 16, his staff had been preparing for exactly this scenario. No combat units had been officially redeployed, but planning had been completed. Routes were assigned, supply dumps repositioned, movement orders were drafted and ready. All that remained was formal authorization. The implication was unmistakable. Patton had anticipated Eisenhower's decision before it was made. To some in the room, this bordered on insubordination. To others, it was the very definition of initiative. Eisenhower understood both interpretations and the risk of each. If Patton failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. But if he succeeded, the Battle of the Bulge could be decisively altered. Eisenhower paused. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. "You arrogant son of a," he said, half in disbelief. "You started moving before I even asked you to." Patton did not deny it. He clarified it. He had not moved to attack. He had prepared to act. The distinction mattered. In war, preparation without execution could still be justified. Eisenhower saw what Patton was offering, not a request, but a solution. After a brief exchange, Eisenhower made his decision. Make it official. Third Army attacks north toward Bastogne, timing as soon as General Patton says he's ready. 72 hours, Patton replied. With that order, one of the most audacious maneuvers of World War II became reality. the Third Army would execute a 90-degree turn under combat conditions in winter against an enemy that did not believe it was possible. As the meeting ended, Patton left the room with authorization, but the controversy was far from over. News of his preparatory actions would soon reach British liaison officers and political leaders in London. Questions would be raised about command discipline, authority, and precedent. But on the ground, those debates meant little. What mattered was that the clock was now running. Bastogne was still surrounded, German forces were still advancing, and the success or failure of Patton's decision would soon be measured not in arguments, but in lives. The Battle of the Bulge had reached its turning point, and the next 72 hours would decide whether bold initiative could outrun disaster.
Once Dwight D. Eisenhower gave the order at Verdun, the responsibility shifted entirely to George S. Patton and the machinery of the Third Army. What followed was not a dramatic charge or a single bold decision, but one of the most complex logistical operations of World War II. The famous 90-degree turn was not a metaphor. It was a literal reorientation of an entire field army in the middle of winter under combat conditions, while the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge still hung in the balance. The scale of the task defied normal military expectations. The Third Army consisted of several corps, multiple divisions, artillery groups, engineers, medical units, fuel convoys, and communications networks. In total, it meant redirecting more than 130,000 vehicles, tens of thousands of tons of supplies, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers across frozen roads already clogged with refugees and retreating units. Every mistake would ripple outward, creating bottlenecks that could paralyze the entire effort. This is where Patton's obsession with WW2 logistics proved decisive. Unlike many commanders who viewed logistics as a secondary concern, Patton treated it as the foundation of combat power. He knew exactly how many miles a truck could travel on winter fuel consumption, how long artillery units needed to re-register their guns, and how quickly supply dumps could be broken down and reassembled. To Patton, speed was not about recklessness, it was about preparation. Movement orders went out immediately. Units were assigned precise routes north, carefully staggered to prevent traffic jams. Engineers worked around the clock to reinforce bridges and clear snow. Military police stood at key intersections to keep columns moving. Supply officers recalculated fuel and ammunition requirements hour by hour. Communication lines were rerouted, sometimes improvised, to keep corps commanders connected as formations shifted. Weather was the constant enemy. Snow reduced visibility to yards. Roads turned into sheets of ice. Vehicles slid into ditches. Engines failed. Men marched with frostbitten hands and feet. Yet the movement did not stop. Patton made it clear that delays were unacceptable. His message to commanders was blunt: if you stop, you're helping the Germans. The genius of the operation lay not just in speed, but in deception. German intelligence did not detect the movement until it was well underway. They assumed the Third Army remained committed to operations in the Saar. The idea that an entire American army could disengage, pivot, and attack from a new direction in winter seemed irrational. That assumption would prove fatal. As columns moved north, the human cost became apparent. Drivers slept at the wheel. Mechanics worked in freezing darkness. Infantry units advanced with minimal rest, yet morale remained high. Soldiers understood the mission. Bastogne had to be relieved. The 101st Airborne Division was still surrounded, rationing ammunition and medical supplies. Every mile covered brought relief closer. Patton monitored the operation, moving between command posts, demanding constant updates. He pressured subordinates relentlessly, but he also protected them from interference.
When higher headquarters questioned the pace or risk, Patton insisted that hesitation was the greater danger. This was the core of the tension between military initiative versus command discipline. The plan was authorized, but its execution pushed every boundary of what the Allied command considered safe. By December 21st, German commanders began to realize something was wrong. Reports arrived of American armored units appearing on their southern flank. At first, these reports were dismissed as reconnaissance elements or isolated probes. The possibility that the Third Army had fully reoriented itself seemed impossible, but it was happening. As lead elements of the 4th Armored Division pushed forward, resistance stiffened. German anti-tank guns, roadblocks, and ambushes slowed progress. The weather prevented close air support. This was not a clean breakthrough. It was a grinding advance through hostile terrain. Patton responded by applying constant pressure. Units were ordered to attack around obstacles rather than stop. Bypassed enemy positions would be dealt with later. Momentum was everything. The broader significance of the 90-degree turn soon became clear. The German plan for the Battle of the Bulge depended on time. Every delay weakened their spearheads, drained fuel reserves, and stretched supply lines beyond repair. By striking the German flank faster than expected, Patton forced them to divert forces from their westward advance, robbing the offensive of its strength. Within 72 hours of Eisenhower's order, the impossible had become reality. An entire American army was in motion, attacking north through snow and fire. Military historians would later dissect the operation in detail, but at the time, its success was measured in simpler terms. Bastogne was no longer alone. The 90-degree turn did not end the Battle of the Bulge, but it changed its direction, literally and strategically. The initiative had shifted. German commanders were reacting instead of advancing, and for the first time since December 16, the outcome of the battle began to tilt back in favor of the Allies. What remained was the hardest part, breaking through to Bastogne itself. And for the men trapped inside the perimeter, every hour still mattered.
By December 21, 1944, Bastogne had become the emotional and operational center of the Battle of the Bulge. Inside the town, the 101st Airborne Division and attached units were encircled on all sides. German artillery pounded the perimeter day and night. Medical supplies were nearly exhausted. Ammunition was rationed. Wounded men lay in makeshift aid stations as temperatures dropped well below freezing. The situation was not heroic in the cinematic sense, it was desperate. The German command understood Bastogne's importance and focused immense pressure on its defenders. Multiple divisions attacked repeatedly, probing for weaknesses. When that failed, the Germans attempted psychological warfare, delivering a formal surrender ultimatum on December 22. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's one-word reply, "nuts," became legendary, but behind the bravado was a grim reality. The defenders could not hold indefinitely. Outside the perimeter, George C. Patton was racing the clock. The Third Army's advance north had been faster than anyone believed possible, but it was far from easy. German resistance stiffened as Patton's intent became clear. Roadblocks, anti-tank guns, and ambushes slowed progress. Snowstorms reduced visibility to a few yards, grounding aircraft and complicating coordination. This was World War II at its harshest. Close-quarters combat fought in ice and mud. Patton responded the only way he knew how: relentless pressure. Units were ordered to keep moving even when losses mounted. When a battalion stalled, Patton demanded alternative routes or immediate attacks. He believed that momentum itself was a weapon. In his view, hesitation was more dangerous than enemy fire. The spearhead of the relief effort was the 4th Armored Division, tasked with punching through German lines south of Bastogne. Progress was slow and costly.
Tanks slid on icy roads. Infantry advanced through forests under constant fire. German defenders fought stubbornly, knowing that holding Bastogne even a few more days could preserve the offensive's momentum. This was where WW2 logistics again proved decisive. Despite the weather and resistance, Patton's supply system kept fuel, ammunition, and replacements moving forward. Artillery units leapfrogged positions to maintain pressure. Engineers cleared routes under fire. Medical evacuation continued despite limited visibility. The machinery of the Third Army functioned under conditions that would normally have brought operations to a halt. On December 24, Christmas Eve, lead elements of the 4th Armored Division reached within 4 miles of Bastogne. The fighting intensified. German units threw everything they had into blocking the final approach. For the men inside the town, the sound of distant artillery offered hope, but no certainty. Relief was close, but not guaranteed. Late that afternoon, Captain William Dwight's tank company launched a final push. The attack was brutal. Tanks were hit. Infantry took casualties, but the advance did not stop. At approximately 4:45 p.m., the company broke through German positions near Assenois. By early evening, American armor entered Bastogne. The siege of Bastogne was officially broken. Inside the perimeter, exhausted paratroopers cheered as supplies and reinforcements poured in. Medical care improved immediately. Ammunition stocks were replenished. The psychological impact was enormous. What had seemed like an inevitable collapse was transformed into a symbol of endurance and of decisive action. For Patton, the moment was deeply personal. When he received confirmation that Bastogne had been relieved, he reportedly paused briefly, overcome by emotion, before returning to the task at hand. There was no celebration. The Battle of the Bulge was not over. German forces were still fighting fiercely, and the corridor to Bastogne had to be widened to prevent renewed encirclement. Strategically, however, the relief marked a turning point. The German offensive depended on speed and surprise. Patton's aggressive response shattered both. German commanders were forced to divert forces away from their westward drive to contain the Third Army, draining the offensive of strength it could not afford to lose. Within the Allied command, the implications were clear. The gamble had worked. Patton's aggressive response had saved Bastogne and likely prevented a far more dangerous collapse of the front. But success raised difficult questions. Had the risk been justified? Had Patton crossed a line in preparing his movement before formal orders? And what precedent did this set for command discipline in World War II? Those questions would soon move from the battlefield to conference rooms and political offices, particularly in London. The relief of Bastogne was a military victory. What followed would be a battle over interpretation, authority, and the meaning of initiative in war.
The relief of Bastogne did more than stabilize the front in the Battle of the Bulge. It triggered a quiet but intense debate within the Allied command, one that went far beyond a single maneuver or a single general. At its core was a question every military organization must eventually confront. Where does disciplined command end, and where must individual initiative begin? From a strictly procedural standpoint, George S. Patton's actions sat in an uncomfortable gray area. He had not launched an unauthorized attack, but he had clearly prepared one before receiving formal orders. Supply dumps had been repositioned, routes had been assigned, units had begun aligning themselves for movement. In peacetime, or even during a slower phase of World War II, such behavior might have resulted in sharp reprimand or relief from command. Yet Bastogne had been relieved. The Third Army had executed a maneuver that many believed impossible, and thousands of American soldiers were alive because the relief arrived when it did. These facts made punishment politically and militarily unthinkable. Within American headquarters, reactions were mixed. Some staff officers worried about precedent.
If one army commander acted ahead of authorization and succeeded, what stopped others from doing the same and failing? The chain of command existed for a reason. Wars were not won by improvisation alone. Coordination prevented friendly fire disasters, logistical collapse, and strategic chaos. Others saw Patton's behavior differently. To them, he had not broken discipline, he had fulfilled its purpose. The goal of command was not paperwork compliance, but effective action. In that sense, Patton's foresight represented military initiative versus command discipline in its purest form. Discipline without initiative risked paralysis. Initiative without discipline risked disorder. Patton, his defenders argued, had balanced both. At the center of this debate stood Dwight D. Eisenhower. As Supreme Allied Commander, Eisenhower understood the danger of allowing personalities to override structure. He had already dealt with Patton's volatility earlier in the war. But Eisenhower also understood context. The Ardennes crisis was not a normal operational environment. It was a moment when the system itself was under stress. Eisenhower's decision was subtle but decisive. He did not publicly rebuke Patton, nor did he endorse acting without authorization as a general principle. Instead, he framed the episode as an example of preparation rather than disobedience. Patton had not forced Eisenhower's hand, Eisenhower implied. He had enabled him to act faster. This framing mattered. It allowed the Allied command to preserve institutional authority while acknowledging exceptional leadership. It also prevented internal division at a moment when unity was essential. The German offensive was still ongoing, and public confidence in Allied coordination could not be shaken. Beyond American headquarters, the debate extended across the Atlantic. British officers, particularly those steeped in staff-driven planning traditions, were more skeptical of Patton's style. Some viewed his aggressiveness as dangerous, even reckless. Others worried that glorifying such behavior could undermine coalition command cohesion. But the strategic reality was undeniable. The German plan for the Battle of the Bulge had failed in large part because it encountered an Allied response faster and more flexible than anticipated. The rapid commitment of the Third Army forced German commanders to divert forces, abandon objectives, and fight defensively far sooner than planned. German after-action assessments reflected this shock. They had expected confusion. They had expected delay. What they encountered instead was immediate counterpressure, an outcome their planning had not accounted for. The psychological impact of that realization rippled through the German command structure. As January 1945 approached, the debate gradually lost urgency. The front stabilized. German forces were pushed back to their starting positions. The immediate crisis passed. But the questions raised by Patton's actions did not disappear. They would resurface in military education, doctrine, and leadership philosophy for decades. Was Patton's success proof that bold initiative should be encouraged at all levels, or was it an exceptional case driven by an exceptional individual under extraordinary circumstances? Could such behavior be institutionalized, or was it inherently personal? In the end, the Battle of the Bulge offered no simple answers. What it did offer was a powerful case study. It showed that rigid adherence to procedure could be as dangerous as reckless independence. It demonstrated that effective command required judgment, trust, and the willingness to accept calculated risk. For George S. Patton, the episode reinforced his reputation as a commander who acted first and justified later. For the Allied command, it reinforced a quieter lesson. Systems exist to serve decisions, not to replace them. And in moments of crisis, the difference between victory and disaster may depend on who is willing to act before certainty arrives. That lesson would soon be echoed, publicly and unmistakably, by one man whose voice carried enormous political and moral weight across the Allied world.
When the smoke cleared over the Ardennes and the last German units were pushed back to their original lines, The Battle of the Bulge was remembered as Hitler's final gamble in the West and as one of the costliest battles of World War II. More than 80,000 American casualties, even higher German losses, entire divisions shattered. But within that immense human cost, certain decisions stood out as decisive. Among them, none was studied more closely than the rapid response of George S. Patton and the movement of the Third Army toward Bastogne. From a purely tactical perspective, the relief of Bastogne did not end the battle overnight. Fighting continued well into January 1945. But strategically, the German offensive was broken the moment Patton's forces struck the southern flank. The German plan relied on speed, surprise, and the assumption that the Allied command would react slowly and methodically. That assumption proved false. Once the Third Army entered the fight, the initiative shifted permanently to the Allies. In the years that followed, military academies around the world dissected Patton's actions not as a legend, but as a case study. The question was never whether the 90-degree turn was impressive. It clearly was. The deeper question was why it succeeded. The answer lay in preparation, logistics, and judgment. World War II logistics, often overlooked in popular history, became the central lesson. Patton did not move faster because he ignored reality. He moved faster because he understood it better than most. Equally important was the command relationship that allowed the maneuver to succeed. Dwight D. Eisenhower's response demonstrated a form of leadership that is often misunderstood. Eisenhower did not lose control of his subordinates. He trusted them while retaining final authority. That balance between oversight and initiative preserved unity while enabling decisive action. The episode became a defining example of how military initiative versus command discipline can coexist rather than conflict. The legacy extended beyond American doctrine. German commanders later acknowledged that Patton's speed fundamentally altered the battle. Their offensive calculations had assumed Allied delay, but when that delay never came, fuel shortages, stretched supply lines, and exposed flanks quickly doomed the operation. The Germans did not lose solely because of weather or numbers. They lost because they encountered leadership willing to act before certainty. For Patton himself, Bastogne reinforced both his strengths and his controversies. He remained a difficult, often abrasive commander, but no one doubted his effectiveness in crisis. His belief that hesitation kills was not a slogan, it was a principle tested under the harshest conditions of World War II. Bastogne proved that bold action, when grounded in preparation, could save lives rather than waste them. The broader lesson of the Battle of the Bulge is not that rules should be ignored, it is that rules exist to support decisions, not replace them. Armies cannot function without discipline, but they also cannot survive without leaders capable of independent judgment when plans collapse. Bastogne became the moment when those truths collided and were reconciled. Decades later, the story still resonates because the dilemma is timeless. In every field where lives and outcomes are on the line, leaders face the same choice: wait for complete certainty or act on informed judgment. Patton chose to act. Eisenhower chose to trust, and the result changed the course of a battle and perhaps shortened the war. That is why Bastogne remains more than a battlefield. It is a lesson in leadership under pressure, in the cost of delay, and in the power of preparation. It reminds us that history often turns not on perfect plans, but on the courage to move when time is running out.